So David Ashford joins us. We're talking firstly in the section about the year that's been, and before you say anything, we'll do a separate interview about what's going on in other places about tribunals. So, well, we started in such high hopes, didn't we? You know, the big job, Treasury Minister.
Yeah, it was an absolute privilege to serve as Treasury Minister, and particularly at such a interesting time, should we say, to take on the role where there'd been the challenges of COVID on the nation's finances, and then of course we had the cost of living crisis coming through. So it was a privilege to be able to take on that job and try and make a difference to the people of the island.
I mean, coming from the big job that you had, was this even bigger, or was it just a different sort of
It was a
pressure?
different sort of challenge.
Right.
Obviously within health, there's very specific challenges, particularly around policy and ensuring that the resources that the department has are used to the best advantage. Within Treasury, it's a much wider view. You've got to look at the overall government finances, and you've got to look at the way it's proportioned and ensuring that all of the different public services are getting a fair share, and actually that the money that's being provided is providing the outcomes that people need.
Did you want the move, or would you have stayed at health?
I was quite happy. I've always said, Paul, I'm happy to take whatever
job.
You know,
what would you like?
I'm offered. I would have been happy with either. I was happy to go to Treasury. If the Chief Minister had equally asked me to stay at health, I would have happily stayed at health.
I mean, even when you took in the Treasury side of things were still obviously coming back from COVID. Where we are today, of course, there's another thing. But what was it like when you saw in that department and the responsibility and the job that you had to do there?
Well, it's a huge responsibility being Treasury Minister, because you are effectively custodian of the nation's finances. Due to many decades of prudent saving, the Isle of Man is in a much better position than many of our other counterparts of a similar size around the world. We have very little external borrowing and compared to other nations, and we have a large reserve. But what we've got to do is ensure that reserve is used wisely, because it doesn't last forever, and we never know what's around the corner. We thought COVID was going to be the big crisis of our generation, and then suddenly along comes cost of living crisis that we're now experiencing. So it is important that the finances are used prudently and targeted correctly.
And that had all started when you were in there or not? I can't remember your time.
Yes, yeah. In fact, I came forward with the first cost of living crisis package, which was an emergency package we brought forward very quickly, trying to target those who would most be immediately impacted by the changes that were coming through.
Okay, well, I suppose we get to this point when you're no longer there. I mean, we can talk about that slightly. I mean, pushed. Did you go? You know, what was going on behind the scenes?
No,
you didn't go straight away, did you?
No, I didn't go straight away because the Chief Minister was off Ireland. The tribunal report came out, I think it was the Wednesday. I read it on the Thursday, so I didn't read it until the Thursday. By then, there'd been a lot of you clamouring for interviews already before I'd even read the full report. And I decided, I was Minister at the time, it was the honourable thing to go. I went to see the Chief Minister on the first opportunity I had, which was the Monday after the weekend when he was back from his trip to Westminster. He asked me to reconsider and to take time to consider it. I did so at his request, and then I decided that I still wanted to go, and at that point he accepted.
You were becoming the story, weren't you?
I was, and I've always said, and I think we've said this in interviews before, that when we've talked about other things, it's important politicians don't become the story. There's a lot of work going on in Treasury. There's an awful lot of work to be done in government. There's particularly an awful lot of work to be done about government culture, which I've raised in the House of Keys and Tynwald many times over the years, and I didn't want to be a distraction from that.
You never said sorry at all, though, did you?
Well, I'm limited still in what I can say
Still?
because of sub judice, because we've got to wait for the whole thing to finish.
Okay.
And I have already said to you, I'm happy to do a longer form interview with you once it is over.
Do you take responsibility at all?
So let's wait for that interview, and then we can do a much longer, much more in depth, rather than trying to pick things off and chisel things off bit at a time. But I still have to be very careful what I say around sub judice until the tribunal completes.
Gosh, okay. Well, let's talk about other things maybe that happened in the last year, that away from that sort of big headline stuff. What have you been up to? What did you do in that first year?
So the first year, obviously a mix. There was very, very much the work of the role in Treasury, of ensuring that we tried to get the nation's finances on track and keep them on track, while at the same time ensuring public services were properly funded. But of course, I'm also a constituency MHK. And as we've discussed before when we've done these year interviews, one of the things I really love about this job is actually getting involved in the constituency constituency and trying to help people on the
So
ground.
what have been the big stories
So several of them. One that I've been pushing for quite a while now is in relation to a crossing point between the two parts of Tremode on Johnny Watson Lane. I've raised it in the House of Keys as well, which I can now do now. I can ask questions again. And DOI has looked at it, and I believe they have now accepted that a crossing point is needed, and they will be installing one, which will make a big difference to people down there, because cars are coming down at quite a speed down that junction, and it's quite a danger for children in particular when they're crossing over for school. I've been dealing with individual constituents' concerns, particularly around cost of living and also housing issues, with having Williston one of the largest housing estates. And that's where, for me, you can have these grand ministerial jobs, as people might call them, but for me what matters, particularly, and one of the things that's very important here on the island, is that you're a local politician trying to help people on the ground. That's what I've always enjoyed doing. That's why I spent 8.5 years as a Douglas councillor before I became a national politician. And it's in my lifeblood, and there's nothing better than where you do solve someone's problem, seeing how much it means to them. You can't solve every problem, and I'm sure there's people out there who've been disappointed as well, equally, that I haven't been able to resolve the issues that they've got. But when you can, it's amazing to see the impact it has on that individual person.
How difficult, therefore, from what you're saying there, is it when you are in Comyn to get on with stuff that's for your constituents, by the very nature that you say yourself, you can ask questions again?
It's just a different way, to be honest. It doesn't stifle you in the way some people sometimes think, because you have direct access to the ministers once a week. All the ministers are together in Council of Ministers. You can raise issues in Council of Ministers as well. And what you do is it's more behind the scenes. So rather than a question in Keys or Tynwald, it's something that you're actually raising directly with the minister, directly with the department, and you're pushing for it behind the scenes via Council of Ministers.
Which way is best?
Well, that is a question that I think, having experienced both the systems, I've found for me they both work, to be perfectly frank. Different people might find different things, but I think even having been there now, this is my 6th year in Tynwald, I think that's still a question that you've finally found a question I can't potentially answer, Paul, after all these years.
Let's write that one down.
You finally got there.
Yeah,
it's one that it's a very interesting question, that, and I think the jury's still out for me on that as to which one is best.
So you haven't become the bad boy of the backbenchers, but you certainly are now vocal.
Well, I don't, and hopefully I was the same when I was last a backbencher. I don't believe in raising things for raising sake, or I'm not a politician who wants to grandstand or try and just push things for the sake of it and get the big news stories. Like I say, I'm much more a local politician. I want to push on the things that I think matter to the island, and if we're going to move it forward. A lot of my questions are about raising awareness about things. So, for instance, I had the question to Mr. Hooper about the autism strategy, and also the legislation that went through the UK around Down syndrome and protecting those individuals' rights. It's important that we are thinking about those things here on Ireland and actually making sure that they move forward, because it will benefit us as a community, and that's where I always see my focus. I don't come from a point of view, and never have, and hopefully never will, of let's trash the government or have a go at the government today. I come from a point of view as if I don't agree with something, that I will look to amend it and try and convince my colleagues to agree with me, and I will always vote how I feel is the right way for the island. And I used to do that when I was a minister as well. If there had been something that I'd fundamentally disagreed with when I was in Council of Ministers, I would have resigned over it. I don't go with this whole thing around, it's collective responsibility.
So you would have resigned the ministerialship?
Yeah, if there was something, I've always said that, if there was something fundamentally I could not agree with that Council of Ministers have been pushing, I would have gone.
We never got that far then, obviously?
It didn't, and most people don't realise that within Council of Ministers, most agreements are reached by consensus. It's very rare it goes to an actual vote.
Now you kind of full-time backbench. I mean, how was it when you were doing all these, and I'm talking about the health even before that, because there's so much work involved. So how do you manage to split your lifestyle in that sense at that time, and how do you do it?
Well, I think I've said before, it is a huge balancing act, and it's probably one of the things I found most frustrating as a minister, is that trying to do it, particularly when you're in intensive departments like DHSC and then Treasury, trying to not let the constituency work slip as well. I'm not going to say I managed to get the balance completely right. I think any politician who says that is probably deluding themselves. I don't think I did get the balance. The balance always right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I always did get the balance right. And I think any politician who says that is probably deluding themselves, because it is a struggle. But it's important that you don't lose that connection with the constituency just because you become a minister.
Been a very interesting year, and we'll now be talking in the next section about the next year. And once again, there's a separate interview because we're literally talking as things are going on in the tribunal. So we'll deal with that in the second one. But in the next section, we'll look forward to the next year.